Imagine being so indoctrinated into a cult that the leaders not only convince you that a baby, an actual infant, is the Antichrist, but also convinces you that in order to protect the cult and its leaders, you need to kill the child. Well, today we are talking about the Order of the Solar Temple, where somehow the leaders managed to do just that. And I have to tell you, it is one of the most strange and most disturbing and upsetting cults I have covered on this channel. And today we are going to do a full deep dive. So sit back, relax, and take a deep breath. It's time to let the fresh air in. Hi everyone, welcome back, or welcome if you're new. My name is Erin, and I am fascinated by all things cults, true crime, and unique spiritual practices. I post 2 or 3 videos on one of these topics every single week, so if you like this sort of thing, please consider subscribing. I would absolutely love to have you here. Now, it is literally officially the holiday season, and something I like to do every holiday season is try to give back a little bit, and something I'm really passionate about is trying to support single parents. I was raised by a single mother, and I know firsthand the amount of stress and desire that one might have if you're a single parent. You're doing it all on your own. Maybe the finances are really challenging, and you just need a little extra help, a little extra cushion this time of year to give your kids the absolute best holiday. So if you are a single parent, please go ahead and email me at letfresherin@gmail.com. Share a little bit about yourself, and also make sure to send me your Amazon wish list, and I will do my best to feature it in one of my upcoming videos. So just remember to create an Amazon wish list. It is pretty easy, pretty straightforward. Just please make sure that you have the address that you want the gifts to be sent to be your address. And that address won't be visible publicly. It'll just make sure that the gifts get sent to you. And I will be featuring a different single parent on all of my videos for the rest of the month leading up to the holidays. So please go ahead and email me. Again, it's letfresherin@gmail.com. And I really look forward to hearing your story. So let's go ahead and jump into this and buckle up because it is a wild ride. The Order of the Solar Temple, or OTS, is one of the most enigmatic and tragic cults of the 20th century. It emerged in the 1980s as a movement that promised spiritual enlightenment and cosmic salvation. What began as an idealistic organization cloaked in mysticism and esoteric traditions soon devolved into a dark and destructive force, culminating in a series of mass murders and unalivings that shocked the world. And today we're going to examine the rise and fall of the Solar Temple, the lives of its leaders, its complex belief system, the daily practices and experiences of the followers, and of course those harrowing events that led to its downfall. So let's start with the founders, Joseph de Mambro and Luc Jouret. So the origins of the Solar Temple are deeply entwined with these 2 founders. And they had very contrasting personalities, but complementary skills that made them a very formidable duo. So Joseph was born in France in 1924, and he began his career as a jeweler. But by the 1960s, he had become increasingly drawn to mysticism and studied a variety of esoteric traditions, including Rosicrucianism, which is like the Rose Cross, and he was into astrology and the lore of the Knights Templar. And these influences would later become the literal backbone of the Solar Temple's ideology. He presented himself as a prophet and spiritual leader, claiming to receive divine revelations and secret knowledge from higher realms. He had a calm and authoritative demeanor, and this earned him a loyal following. especially people who were seeking guidance and spiritual answers. And the thing is, his early life was relatively ordinary. He trained as a watchmaker and jeweler, and he had some professions that required a lot of precision and discipline. So the cultural climate of the 1960s and 70s is pretty well characterized by this growing interest in New Age philosophies, astrology, and just in general alternative spirituality. It was like prime time cult atmosphere. So many cults came out during this time. And it provided a very fertile ground for individuals like Mambro to gain an influence. So he began to claim that he was receiving divine revelations and secret knowledge from higher realms, and started to position himself as a spiritual guide with access to universal truth. Mambro's calm and authoritative demeanor, combined with his apparent mastery of mystical knowledge, attracted followers who were disillusioned with traditional religion and just sought deeper meaning in life. By the late 1970s, he had started forming small spiritual groups. He tested his ability to control and manipulate others. And he was adept at creating this sense of exclusivity. And he was able to convince his followers that they were part of a select group destined for spiritual greatness. And it was these early experiments in leadership that laid the groundwork for the more formal organization that he would later establish. Luc Jouret's path to the Solar Temple was quite different from Mambro's. Born on October 18, 1947, in Kikwit, Belgian Congo, which is modern-day Democratic Republic of Congo, Jouret grew up in a colonial environment. He pursued a traditional education and eventually earned a medical degree. And after completing his training, Jouret became a homeopathic doctor, and this was a profession that allowed him to blend scientific knowledge with alternative medicine. So this combination of credibility and open-mindedness towards unconventional practices became one of his defining traits. Jouret's charisma and eloquence were evident early in his career. He was a gifted speaker who could captivate audiences on his lectures on a wide range of topics, from spirituality and ecology to humanity's cosmic destiny. His talks often combined practical advice with philosophical musings and appealed to educated, middle-class professionals who were searching for purpose in this rapidly changing world. And it just goes to show that just because you're smart and well-educated doesn't mean you can't get sucked into a group like this, because they look so legitimate at the beginning. Jouret's medical background gave him this air of legitimacy, and his ability to articulate complex spiritual concepts in an accessible way made him an effective recruiter. So now these two gents meet. Mambro and Jouret met in the early 1980s, and this was a very pivotal moment, because we have Mambro, who'd already kind of begun experimenting with small-scale spiritual organizations. And the second he met Jouret, he was like, this is the perfect partner. So while Mambro was a little more reserved and calculating, Jouret was dynamic and magnetic. Their partnership allowed them to combine their strengths. Mambro's deep understanding of mystical traditions and organizational skills, and Jouret's ability to inspire and attract followers. And at the time, Europe, and I think a lot of the rest of the world, was experiencing a surge of interest in New Age spirituality. And this was driven by widespread disillusionment from the traditional institutions. The 1980s were marked by economic uncertainty, environmental concerns, and a growing fascination with alternative paths to fulfillment. This cultural backdrop provided an ideal environment for the emergence of a group like the Solar Temple. In 1984, Mambro and Jouret formally established the Order of the Solar Temple. The organization was heavily influenced by Mambro's obsession with the Knights Templar and some other esoteric traditions. He envisioned the Solar Temple as a modern-day successor to the Templar Order, and felt like they were tasked with preserving ancient wisdom and guiding humanity towards spiritual salvation. The group's name itself evoked a sense of mysticism and cosmic significance, and it suggested a connection to the sun as a source of life and enlightenment. It reminds me of people who are like sunning their buttholes every morning because they think it gives them more energy. Maybe we don't do that, but hey, whatever floats your boat, I guess. So the Solar Temple's mission was multifaceted. On the surface, it promised spiritual enlightenment and personal growth, just like every other cult we've ever covered on this channel. Members were told in this cult, though, that they were part of an elite group chosen to transcend the material world and ascend to a higher spiritual plane. At a deeper level, the group's teachings were apocalyptic and warned of an imminent collapse of the modern world. Mambro and Jouret positioned the Solar Temple as humanity's last hope for salvation, and they emphasized that only those who adhered to their teachings could survive the coming cataclysm. So this combination of exclusivity, spirituality, and apocalyptic urgency was highly effective. The Solar Temple attracted members who were educated, financially secure, and eager to find meaning in their lives. Many were professionals, including doctors, lawyers, and business people who were drawn to the group's intellectual and spiritual framework. Mambro and Jouret also cultivated a sense of mystique and secrecy. Members underwent these elaborate initiation ceremonies. They swore oaths of loyalty and commitment to themselves and the group's mission. And these rituals reinforced the idea that they were a part of something greater than themselves. They were deepening their devotion to the leaders and the cause. The reason behind the creation of the Solar Temple was very complex, and it was rooted in both ideological and personal motivations. For Mambro, the Solar Temple was a means of solidifying his status as a spiritual authority and fulfilling his grandiose vision of leading a new Templar-like order. His claim to divine revelations and secret knowledge was a way to command respect and obedience, allowing him to exert control over others and fund his very luxurious lifestyle. And for Jouret, the Solar Temple presented an opportunity to channel all of his charisma and rhetorical skills into a cause that aligned with his interests in spirituality and alternative medicine. So while Jouret may have initially believed in some of the group's teachings, his role as the organization's public face also allowed him to wield significant influence and enjoy those perks of leadership. Both men were likely driven by a mix of genuine belief and self-interest. They were products of their time, capitalizing on the growing disillusionment with traditional institutions and the rising interest in New Age spirituality. So by combining their talents, they created a movement that promised to bridge that gap between physical and spiritual worlds. And this may have offered people who'd been struggling internally, who may have everything figured out on the outside, but a longing or desperation for something bigger on the inside. It gave followers that sense of purpose that they were looking for. So we have mysticism, apocalypse, cosmic salvation. Like, what is this group even about? The Solar Temple's belief system was this eclectic mix of Christianity, New Age spirituality, astrology, conspiracy theories, and all of that was interwoven with ancient myths about the Knights of Templar. So I was like, I don't know what this is. I need to look into this more. So I, of course, did a little research. Central to the group's ideology was this notion that humanity was on the brink of spiritual collapse. Mambro and Jouret taught that the world was rife with corruption and materialism, and that only a select group of enlightened individuals could ascend to a higher spiritual plane. Because of course, doesn't every cult leader say the same thing? However, with this group, this ascension, they claimed, would occur after death, when the members' souls would travel to the star Sirius, and this is considered by the group to be celestial paradise, the equivalent to heaven. They're living on a star. The Solar Temple portrayed itself as the spiritual successor to the Knights Templar, and this was a medieval Christian military order. Members were told that they were reincarnated Templar knights chosen to carry out a divine mission. So this narrative was constantly reinforced through rituals they were doing, symbols, costumes, and it helped create a sense of identity and purpose among the followers, while simultaneously allowing followers or forcing followers to strip away their real-life identity. So the Knights Templar was formerly known as the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, and it was a medieval Christian military order that existed between the 12th and early 14th centuries. The Templars are renowned for their legendary status. They blended elements of spirituality with military prowess and mysticism, which have fueled fascination and speculation for centuries. So here's like a little bit of a detailed overview of the history, the rise to power, the roles, downfall, and enduring legacy. The Knights of Templar were founded in 1119 CE in the aftermath of the First Crusade, which resulted in the Christian conquest of Jerusalem. The order was established by Hugues de Payens, a French knight with his 8 companions. So their primary mission was to protect Christian pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land, especially those venturing into certain sacred sites in Jerusalem. So initially, the order was small and relatively obscure, and the name Templar derived from their headquarters near the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, which is a site of immense religious significance for Jewish people, Christians, and Muslims. So the Templars believed that they were directly serving God by safeguarding these sacred spaces and defending Christian interests. In 1129, the Templars gained formal recognition by the Catholic Church at the Council of Troyes. They received the endorsement of influential figures like Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, who was a prominent theologian and a key advocate of the order. Saint Bernard helped craft the Templars' code of conduct, emphasizing a blend of monastic discipline and martial commitment. So with this recognition, the order began to grow rapidly in prestige and in influence. The Knights Templar combined the religious devotion of monks with the military training of knights, and this created a unique organization that was both very spiritual but also very militant. Members took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience and dedicated their lives to the defense of Christianity. At the top of the Templar hierarchy was the Grand Master, who led the order and was based in Jerusalem, but later moved as the Crusader states started to fall. Below the Grand Master were the knights, the sergeants, and chaplains, each with their own specific roles. Then we have the lay people who supported the Templars. They were often, the donors or administrators who helped manage the order's vast estates. So the Templars became this elite fighting force of the time. They were renowned for their discipline and their fearlessness in battle, and they played key roles in defending Crusader states and participating in massive battles, such as the Battle of Hattin and the defense of Acre in 1291. They wore distinctive white mantle emblazoned with red crosses, symbolizing their martyrdom and divine mission. And over time, the Templars transitioned from a purely military organization to one of the most powerful financial institutions in Europe. So yeah, I guess that vow of poverty didn't last too long. So they operated a network of fortified castles across Europe and the Holy Land, and ended up developing early forms of banking, including issuing letters of credit to pilgrims to protect their wealth during long journeys. And their wealth just started to grow exponentially as nobles and kings started to donate land and money and resources to the order in exchange for certain spiritual benefits and even military support. The Templars' proximity to the Temple Mount, which is believed to be the site of Solomon's temple, and their secretive nature really fueled rumors and speculation. So over the centuries, a lot of myths about the Templars have emerged, and it often portrays them as keepers of esoteric knowledge or sacred relics. Some legends suggest that the Templars guarded the Holy Grail, the cup used by Jesus at the Last Supper, or even other sacred relics such as the Ark of the Covenant. And so these claims are largely speculative with really not much historical evidence to support them, but it wouldn't surprise me if the leaders of this particular cult used all of that speculation to their advantage. The Templars were often accused of practicing heretical rites or holding secret knowledge about Christianity. These accusations were partly responsible for their overall downfall, because later occultists and mystics, including 18th century Freemasons, would end up adopting Templar symbolism and stories, but then intertwine them with more mysticism. So it's really not as Catholic and Christian as they wanted it to be. So the decline of the Templars was rapid and it was brutal. By the early 14th century, the Crusader states in the Holy Land had fallen, and the Templars' military mission had largely failed. However, their immense wealth and independence made them a target for powerful rulers. So this is where we start to hear about King Philip IV of France. He was deeply in debt to the Templars, and he sought to completely eliminate them and seize the wealth. So in 1307, he orchestrated the arrest of hundreds of Templars all across France. He accused them of heresy, blasphemy, and immoral practices. And under torture, many people confessed to crimes that they likely did not commit, including worshiping idols and denying Christ. There was also Pope Clement V. King Philip actually got the Pope in 1312 to officially dissolve the Templar order and basically declare that there is absolutely no connection to the Templar order and Catholicism. Many Templars were executed or imprisoned, and their properties were then confiscated, often redistributed to other orders like the Knights Hospitaller. And then in 1314, there was the execution of the Grand Master, Jacques de Molay. He was burned at the stake in Paris. And according to legend, de Molay cursed Philip and Clement and predicted their deaths within the year. And this was allegedly a prophecy that ended up coming true. But although this might be the first time you've heard about the Templars, they're frequently referenced in pop culture. They've appeared in books like The Da Vinci Code, movies, and even video games such as Assassin's Creed. And there are many secret societies and fraternal organizations like the Freemasons who have adopted Templar-inspired rituals and symbols. The Templars also helped lay the groundwork for modern banking and financial systems, particularly with their innovations in letters of credit. So if you're stuck in credit card debt, just blame these guys from like the year 1100. You can tell your creditors that. They might let your debt be just forgiven. If only, right? So while the Templars' historical role as warriors and bankers is really well documented, much of their mystical reputation stems from these embellishments and conspiracy theories. The Knights Templars' combination of spirituality, secrecy, and this martial discipline made them a really compelling model for mystically inclined groups like the Order of the Solar Temple. Joseph de Mambro and Luc Jouret tapped into the Templars' mythos to lend an air of ancient legitimacy to their cult. By claiming a spiritual lineage tied to the Templars, they evoked a sense of destiny, exclusivity, divine purpose, and they attracted followers who sought to be part of a grand historical mission. And it also creates this us versus them mentality, because if you are basically the reincarnation of the Knights Templars, then you are already knowing going into it that you're going to be persecuted against in some way. So immediately you already have this us versus them mentality combined with this exclusivity aspect of it, where you start feeling better than other people and driven by this common purpose. Everybody on the outside is going to seem like they're out to get you or against you in general. So in the end, the Templars' real history and their symbolic power remain a testament to how myths and legends can outlive the organizations that inspired them and even continue to captivate and influence people for centuries. So now that we've covered all of that, which I feel like could have been a totally separate video, I'm sure there's a historian out there in the comments that's going to be like, you missed this detail, Aaron. I'm sorry. But I also want to introduce the Solar Temple's apocalyptic teachings, because these were also a key element of its ideology. Mambro and Jouret predicted the imminent end of the world, so they framed the Solar Temple as humanity's last hope for salvation. These doomsday predictions created a sense of urgency, and it compelled members to devote their lives and their finances to the cause. So by positioning themselves as the gatekeepers to salvation, Mambro and Jouret wielded immense psychological power over their followers. So what was it like inside for the followers? Well, life within the Solar Temple was a blend of spiritual devotion, strict discipline, and of course, financial exploitation. Members were required to participate in these elaborate ceremonies that evoked medieval and esoteric traditions. These rituals often took place in a dimly lit room adorned with candles and swords and religious symbols. Participants would be dressed in these ornate robes and chanted hymns while performing carefully choreographed movements. It feels very like Ninth Gate to me, if you know what that movie is. It's great. It's a little creepy, but it's really good. And so these ceremonies kind of make me think of the ceremonies that happen in that movie. And they were designed to instill this sense of awe in the members and, of course, reinforce the group's teachings. And since it felt very exclusive, not everyone was invited, it made people feel special. And outside of these rituals, members were expected to adhere to strict rules governing their personal lives. Mambro and Jouret dictated everything from dietary restrictions to romantic relationships, like literally asking permission who you could date. So they asserted so much control because they said that it was necessary for spiritual purity. Members were, of course, also encouraged or, pressured to sever ties with family and friends outside of the group. I mean, of course, because you have to be isolated from mainstream society and any family members that might ask you a question or potentially get you to leave the group. And this isolation made members increasingly dependent on the Solar Temple for emotional and social support. And now we're here at the financial contributions portion, because these were another cornerstone of daily life in the group. Members were required to donate substantial sums of money, ostensibly to fund the group's spiritual mission. Yeah. These funds were actually used to maintain the leaders' lavish lifestyles, including luxury homes and expensive cars, and of course those lavish and extravagant ceremonies. And of course, Mambro justified all of these expenses by claiming that they were essential for the group's cosmic mission. We have to do this. We have to throw these rituals. I have to drive a fancy car. He also staged these elaborate deceptions, including fake miracles such as holographic projections of religious figures, because he thought this would convince members of his divine authority. It reminds me of like an evangelical healing where everything's just like staged and faked. It's absolutely disgusting. It's such a weird, scary group. These practices within the Order of the Solar Temple were meticulously crafted. We have this ritualistic pageantry, psychological manipulation, and financial exploitation, all designed to just control members and perpetuate the power and wealth of the leaders. The day-to-day life of the members revolved around strict adherence to rules. So, of course, these elaborate ceremonies and rituals were mandatory. You had to show up to them. These rituals were elaborate. I mean, they combined that medieval tradition, esotericism, and Christian symbolism. They were so theatrical because they were intended to invoke this sense of awe and mystery and spiritual significance. And they also served to reinforce all of the teachings and the idea of who the leaders of the group are. Members were encouraged to dress in white to symbolize purity, High-ranking members were allowed to wear more elaborate garments that were distinguished by their specific colors or adornments, and this signified their elevated spiritual status. Because remember, you're not as spiritually enlightened as the leader, and we're going to remind you of that. So these costumes helped members assume those specific roles within the rituals, and it would reinforce that hierarchical structure of the group. So for some, members might play the role of Templar knights or ancient priests, and they would add this element of role-playing that heightened this immersive experience. It feels like if Dungeons and Dragons was like an actual cult, and then they mixed in all of these other rituals and history and mythology and interwove it into this one experiment. And of course, Mambro and Jouret presided over the rituals, guided the participants through each stage, and they claimed that these ceremonies were not just symbolic, but they were actually crucial for maintaining the group's spiritual connection to higher realms. But in reality, it was just a method of control, telling the group members that you have to be here at a certain time and you have to spend time preparing for the ritual because you have to know what to wear, know what to say, know how to role play. It is all about control. And of course, this is where those miracles would be demonstrated. And people really thought that they were witnessing genuine manifestations of divine power. But what's almost more concerning than these rituals are the rules that governed the personal lives. Members were expected to adhere to strict rules every single day. I mean, this was from personal behavior to diet to relationships, and these rules were all justified as necessary for achieving spiritual purity. The imposition of these rules served to isolate members from their previous lives and make them increasingly dependent on the group. Members were instructed to follow specific diets, purportedly to cleanse their bodies and align their energy with spiritual frequencies. These restrictions seemed to vary, but they commonly included abstaining from alcohol, processed foods, and meat. And this dietary control not only enforced the group's authority over individual choices, but it also seemed to create this trauma bond with members who were all experiencing these changes and this discipline together. Also, I mentioned it a little bit before, but it's so deeply disturbing. I want to talk about it a little bit more deeply. Mambro and Jouret closely monitored both romantic and sexual relationships within the group and even dictated who could be with whom. They claimed that these arrangements, they were literally arrangements, were divinely guided and asserted that certain unions would disrupt the group's overall spiritual energy. Oh, what? They would even sometimes dissolve marriages and pair members of that marriage with new partners because they just wanted to demonstrate their control over everyone's personal lives. And of course, the members couldn't be interacting with people outside of the group. They had to be isolated. And this isolation was presented as a way to protect members from negative influences and maintain their spiritual focus and stay enlightened so no one can pull them back down. But in reality, it was a tactic to cut off any dissenting voice and create this echo chamber where the group's teachings went completely unchallenged. The resulting isolation left members with no support system outside the solar temple, and this made it increasingly difficult for them to leave. And then, of course, we have the financial exploitation. Since members were required to donate such large sums of money, which were framed as necessary for the group's mission, it also just served to enrich the leaders' lifestyles. And if you lack support, you lack financial freedom, you lack any individuality at all, you're going to feel so dependent on the group. But of course, they claimed that they needed the money to create these spiritual sanctuaries and prepare everyone for the eventual transit to the star Sirius. Members were told that their financial sacrifices were an essential part of their spiritual journey, and that their generosity would be rewarded in the afterlife. So while members often made these significant personal sacrifices, Mambro and Jouret were living those luxurious lifestyles. They had opulent homes, drove expensive cars, hosted lavish events. I mean, they were enjoying the benefits of the group's wealth. I mean, one of them would even use the money to fund public speaking tours and even personal expenses. And so this contrast between the leader's lifestyle and the sacrifices that were demanded of the members was so stark, but it was still justified as part of the divine mission. Central to the Solar Temple's practices was the psychological manipulation of the members. Mambro and Jouret used a combination of fear, guilt, and spiritual promises to maintain control over their followers. The group's teachings emphasized the imminent collapse of the entire world. So this created this sense of urgency among members. We have to be committed now. They were told that only through their total devotion to the Solar Temple could they survive the coming destruction of society. And this fear was such a powerful motivator because it compelled members to prioritize the group's demands over their own well-being. Also, the leaders used guilt to control members and would accuse them of spiritual failings if they questioned authority or expressed any doubts. The leaders would claim that such doubts disrupted the entire group's energy and it endangered the mission as a whole. So this guilt reinforced members' dependence on the leaders for both guidance and also validation. And one of the most striking aspects of the Solar Temple's practices was these staged miracles that Mambro used to try to solidify his divine authority. He employed advanced technology like holographic projectors to create an illusion of supernatural events. So, for example, he claimed to channel messages from cosmic entities or manifest visions of religious figures, and these deceptions were incredibly convincing in the context of the group's rituals, where the atmospheric settings and the heightened emotions primed members to believe in the miracles. I wouldn't be surprised if they had, like, a smoke machine in there. Mambro also fabricated stories about the group's spiritual lineage, claiming that its members were reincarnated Templar knights chosen to carry out this divine mission. So this narrative gave members a sense of purpose and connection to some grand historical tradition and made them more willing to endure sacrifices that were demanded of them. But as the Solar Temple grew, so did its darker tendencies. By the early 1990s, the group had become increasingly paranoid and authoritarian. Mambro and Jouret began to see enemies everywhere, from former members who had left the group to outsiders who questioned their practices. This paranoia fueled a culture of secrecy and control, and it made it really difficult for members to voice dissent or even seek any help. And by 1994, cracks were forming in the cult's facade. Members were leaving or questioning the group's teachings, and external scrutiny was mounting. Amid this tension, Mambro grew increasingly paranoid, convinced that external forces and internal dissent threatened the spiritual purity of the group. One of the targets of his paranoia was a young boy, the infant of Tony and Nikki DeToy, former members of the cult who had defected. The DeToys had been very vocal about their dissatisfaction with the group, and they had moved to Switzerland to distance themselves from its influence. Mambro, seeing this couple's departure as a total betrayal, absolutely fixated on their newborn son as a symbolic but also literal representation of their rebellion against him. And in a disturbing escalation of delusions, Mambro declared that the child was the Antichrist, a figure from Christian eschatology believed to be the ultimate enemy of Christ and an agent of apocalyptic destruction. According to Mambro, the child's existence posed a direct threat to the Solar Temple's mission. He literally claimed that the infant had been born with the purpose to destroy the group and prevent its members from achieving their prophesized transcendence to the star Sirius. And it's like, bro, not everything is about you. And of course, this assertion was not rooted in any observable behavior or action by the child. I mean, he was an infant, but in Mambro's increasingly unhinged need to control the narrative surrounding the group, he was able to convince people that the child was the Antichrist. And labeling the child as such had several purposes. I mean, for one, it shifted blame for the group's growing instability onto an external target and reinforced the idea that Solar Temple was under siege by dark forces, and then it justified any extreme action to, quote, protect, unquote, the group. But members were still skeptical. Many had begun to question the leadership and the financial exploitation of the group. And some defectors had even gone public with accusations that started to tarnish the cult's reputation. And the Dutoit family was among these defectors. So, externally, the group began to face growing scrutiny, even from law enforcement as well as media outlets. Investigations into the Solar Temple's financial dealings and suspicious activities were underway, and it became clear that the cult's secrecy was being eroded. Mambro and Jouret, once revered as spiritual authorities, now saw their carefully constructed empire begin to crumble. For Mambro, whose control over the group was deeply tied to his claims of divine authority, these were really challenging times, and they were basically existential threats to him. His paranoia just kept escalating, and he became increasingly convinced that the group was under attack. And this narrative of persecution was not only a reflection of his mental state, but also a strategic tool to maintain power. By framing external scrutiny as evidence of a cosmic battle between good and evil, Mambro was able to galvanize his followers and justify extreme actions. Now, this is where we're going to start talking about the murders, so trigger warning if you're sensitive to that. On October 4th, 1994, Mambro and his followers orchestrated the murders of the Dutoit family in Switzerland. Tony, Nikki, and their 3-month son were lured to a chalet under the pretense of meeting with former friends. And once there, they were brutally attacked and killed. This next detail is a little disturbing, so take care of yourself if you need to. The baby was stabbed repeatedly with a wooden stake. This was a grotesque and symbolic act that was meant to neutralize the supposed Antichrist. The parents were also murdered, and this was most likely to prevent them from speaking out against the group or otherwise retaliating. The ritualistic nature of the killings, particularly the brutal stabbing of the infant, highlighted how deeply the group's apocalyptic beliefs had infiltrated their morality. In the warped logic of the Solar Temple, this act was framed as a necessary sacrifice to protect their spiritual mission. The murders of the Dutoit family shocked even some of the group's most loyal followers. While many members were already entrenched in the cult's belief system, the brutal killing of an innocent child revealed the extreme lengths to which Mambro and Jouret were willing to go to maintain control. And for some members, this incident actually deepened their commitment, most likely because it reinforced this narrative that there was a battle that the group had to go into that was against dark forces that were trying to destroy the world. For others, thank goodness, it sowed these seeds of doubt and fear. However, at this point, with people being so sucked in, leaving the group was almost impossible without risking severe consequences. But the murders also marked a turning point in the Solar Temple's descent into violence. So just weeks later, in October 1994, the group carried out a series of mass murder unalivings in Switzerland and Canada, claiming the lives of over 50 members. And these events were framed as the group's transit to a higher spiritual plane, but they also served as a way for Mambro and Jouret to escape accountability for their actions, escape all accountability. I mean, this was the group's ultimate goal. It was to transit to the star Sirius, that celestial paradise that Mambro claimed was the spiritual home of the Order's members. And this journey would conveniently take place after death, and it was not framed as an end, but rather a transformation. The members who stuck around truly believed that their physical deaths would free their souls to reunite with divine forces and fulfill their cosmic purpose. By orchestrating this dramatic and ritualized end, the leaders could maintain the illusion of control and try to reinforce their apocalyptic narrative because the followers would never know the truth. For Mambro, the unalivings were also an opportunity to immortalize himself as a spiritual leader. I mean, he'd always portrayed the solar temple as a divine mission, and a spectacular departure to Sirius would cement his legacy as the orchestrator of a divine cosmic event. This desire for immortality and vindication likely played a significant role in the decision to stage these mass deaths. So there were 3 locations where these mass murder unalivings took place, 2 in Switzerland and 1 in Canada. Over 50 people, including the leaders, lost their lives in these events. The details of what occurred at each event are absolutely harrowing. So in one of the locations in Switzerland, in a farmhouse, 23 members of the Solar Temple were found dead. Many were drugged and some had been shot. Their bodies were creepily arranged in this circle, and this was a formation that symbolized unity and spiritual ascension. The farmhouse was then somehow set ablaze and destroyed a ton of evidence and added that dramatic, ritualistic element to the scene. In the other location in Switzerland, 25 more bodies were discovered in a chalet. And once again, many had been drugged or shot, and their remains were positioned in a ritualistic pattern. The chalet was also burned. Now, in Canada, 5 members, including a child, were killed in a very similar way in a rural home. There's so much that's so disturbing about this coordinated effort to conduct these ritualistic killings, and also who set the homes on fire? Like, how was this all orchestrated? It just breaks my heart for the followers who really, really believed that they were doing something good. And at one point, we talk about a lot on this channel how victims end up becoming perpetrators. And this is why cults are so important to talk about and try our best to understand, because it can take a really smart person to get involved in a group like this. And some people get out before they break the law or hurt anyone or kill anyone. But then there are people that are complicit or lose their own lives because they believe so deeply in something that from the outside sounds so outlandish and wild. And that's why I think we just have to approach this content with empathy and understanding. And of course, hold people accountable for their behavior, because you should, of course, despite indoctrination, recognize that killing somebody is probably the worst thing you could do. But I also, it just breaks my heart for all of the people involved in this group. I mean, it's absolutely heartbreaking. Investigators found farewell letters from several members expressing their belief that they were embarking on a cosmic journey. These letters often described their deaths as voluntary acts of spiritual liberation. And while some members willingly participated, there is evidence to suggest that not all of these deaths were voluntary. Forensic investigations revealed that many victims had been drugged or shot, indicating that coercion and outright murder played a significant role. Mambro and Jouret likely used their inner circle to enforce compliance, ensuring that even reluctant members could not escape the group's final act. For the members of the Solar Temple who participated in the mass unalivings, the event was framed as a spiritual triumph rather than a tragedy. Years of indoctrination had prepared them to see death as a necessary and even desirable step in their journey. Through elaborate rituals, teachings, and those staged miracles, Mambro and Jouret had convinced their followers that they were chosen for a divine mission and that their deaths would have cosmic significance. Whew. I'm starting to get emotional. This one's really hitting me hard. It's just so insidious and evil. And this is why these types of isolationist practices are so dangerous when it comes to cults, the way that they tear you apart from your family, because your family is the one that's going to be totally impacted by your behavior. I mean, the members who had severed ties with family and friends, they had no external perspective to challenge the leader's narrative with. It was a totally closed off environment where any dissenting voice was silenced. So this collective belief in the apocalypse was just totally reinforced, even self-reinforced. But luckily, by the late 1990s, the Solar Temple had effectively disbanded, but its tragic legacy endures. These events serve as an absolutely haunting reminder of how charismatic leaders can manipulate belief systems so well and not only justify self-harm, but also violence onto others, just so they can maintain control and make some money. It's sickening. For the members who lost their lives, it was because of the promise of spiritual transcendence, and it was just this deadly illusion. And it was all orchestrated by leaders who placed their own egos above the well-being of their followers. We really need to be careful about unchecked power. It's really scary how such deeply held beliefs, when manipulated by unscrupulous leaders, can lead to absolutely devastating consequences. The Solar Temple exploited universal human desires for purpose, community, and spiritual connection, and turned these desires into tools of control and destruction. And today, the Solar Temple is remembered as one of the most disturbing and infamous cults of the modern era. It teaches us valuable lessons about the vulnerabilities that cults exploit and the warning signs that can help prevent similar tragedies. In the end, the Solar Temple's story is not just about its leaders or its followers. It also serves as a cautionary tale about the power of belief and the importance of critical thinking, skepticism, and vigilance in the face of these types of extraordinary claims. For those who lost loved ones to the group, it's also a reminder for the enduring need for compassion, understanding, and accountability as we strive to learn from the past and protect against future harm. So what do you guys all think about this? Was it as horrifying to you as it was me? This one, I mean, obviously every video I share is really upsetting. But this, I don't know why. I think it's because it feels so exploitative. And to claim that a child is the Antichrist who's 3 months old, it just feels not even possible. Anyways, I'm eager to read your comments. I'm eager to hear from you. Please go ahead and send me your Amazon wish list if you so desire, and hopefully we can help you give your kids the most amazing holiday season they've ever seen. Even if it's they need a new coat, they need new shoes, they need a new notebook for school, whatever it might be, whatever you need to support you this holiday season. Well, that's it for today's video, everyone. Please stay safe out there, ask questions, and always stay skeptical. I'll see you in my next video. Bye.